And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. There is a week-long action by climate and indigenous groups in Washington, D.C. 135 activists were arrested on Monday at the White House. While Monday's actions highlight indigenous-led resistance to fossil fuels and mark Indigenous Peoples Day, that was Monday, Tuesday's action is going to focus on how fossil fuels are driving the climate crisis. We will have with us in a moment John Beard Jr., the founder and chairman and CEO of the Port Arthur Community Action Network. But right now we've got his video, but we don't have his audio. Joyce is trying to call him, and so that we can carry his audio on radio. Not sure what exactly is going on there, but oh, there he is. Okay. John Beard Jr., you are on the phone.
Yes, I am, indeed, in the flesh.
Thank you kindly. So tell us about the climate change emergency. Why do we need to declare a climate change emergency, stop all new fossil projects? And actually, let's start out with what's going on in Washington, D.C. this week.
Well, what's going on in Washington, D.C. is that we're having a break free from fossil fuels movement, is staging rather, a people versus fossil fuels protest, and it's a part of that movement. Mm-hmm. And we're saying that we believe that the president must declare a climate emergency because of what's happening all over, not just this country, but around the world. The climate change, which is induced by our heavy dependence on fossil fuels and the burning thereof, is creating a problem where, from where I'm at on the Gulf Coast, we have these hurricanes and storms with torrential rains, and we have numerous climatological issues all over the country, ranging from forest fires out west to the flooding and the drenching in the Midwest and flooding and hurricanes on the East Coast. Mm-hmm. So in order to prevent greater catastrophe, we are asking the president to declare a climate emergency and to ban all the expansion of fossil fuels for export and the creation of new fossil fuel facilities, and to also take necessary measures to usher in an age of clean, green, renewable energy.
Are you finding allies in this request or demand?
Yes, we've got quite a few allies. There are people that are slowly beginning to come around and understand what's actually happening here and happening to us. And for those that aren't allies, and I've run into quite a few, my statement to them is, that are climate disbelievers and the like. Well, if you're wrong, do we have the luxury of you being wrong? Do we have the luxury of continuing to go this route? Because we're reaching a tipping point where if the Earth's temperature exceeds that 1.2 degrees, 1.5 degrees Celsius in its average overall temperature, then the effects of climate change will be irreversible. And life as we know it will be dramatically and drastically changed forever. So we want to avert that type of catastrophe and the effect it has on not just the planet, but on human life in general.
So Monday's march in Washington, D.C. To declare a climate emergency. Monday's had a heavy emphasis on Indigenous people because Monday was an Indigenous Peoples Day, number one, and number two, the Indigenous peoples of the planet have been yelling at us for the past 50 years at least to stop basically raping our planet. Number two, on Tuesday, it was focused on how fossil fuels are driving the climate crisis. Today is Wednesday. I understand you just came from the protest or the demonstration or march or whatever you want to call it. Tell us about today and what's going to happen through the rest of the week, John.
Well, the issue today was regarding our communities can't wait. We can't afford to wait when we're having these catastrophes and the floods and the heavy rains and the hurricanes that are driven by climate change and fossil fuel use. Our communities can't stand it. Our communities can't also stand it because the companies that locate here pollute and they create problems that make life very difficult for people. The prosperity even that they promise, they all promise to create jobs and opportunity. But people of color, and especially indigenous peoples, they don't see those opportunities and they don't get those jobs. And if they do, there are very few of them in proportion to the number of people in that given area. So as I like to say, and especially about my hometown, Port Arthur, that we are the sacrifice zone for America. We take the brunt of all of the pollution and contamination and all, so America can enjoy its fossil fueled life. But there comes a time at some point that you have to change the direction you're going. And now with this crisis, we've got to move in a different direction. So that's what today was about, telling the stories of our various communities. And tomorrow's issue will be trying to think about it. So many of these issues, but tomorrow's issue will be somewhat a continuation of those stories, but to also look at the fact that we don't need to have false solutions. They're pushing hydrogen use. They're pushing other sorts of fuels, methane, and other sources of energy. But those are only false solutions. They're talking about carbon capture and sequestration. That's a false solution. You're just transferring the problem somewhere else. The problem is, if you want to reduce carbon, reduce your carbon footprint, reduce the amount of carbon you put in the atmosphere. So we're going to talk about that tomorrow, about false solutions and why they're false and why the president has no choice, rather, than to call a climate emergency, institute the right plans to take us on a different course and direction. And what I also would like to say is that we need reformative justice in communities that have been adversely affected, that people of color have been neglected and abused and mistreated by the fossil fuel companies and those that participate in that business. So we want to restore them to a proper place so that this new clean green economy is going to be one built on fairness and equity and, I guess you'd say, justice for all.
When I asked you about allies, I'm wondering how many politicians are openly, calling for. I mean, the step that you've got Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan that has broad, support across the Democratic caucus, with the exception of Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, and it would replace a lot of our fossil fuel structure with infrastructure with solar and wind and good stuff like that, and would provide incentives to move in those directions. But that is still not a let's call an emergency and bring everything to a screeching halt kind of even conversation, much less plan. Are there any people in Congress who are saying what you're saying now, John Beer Jr.?
There are some members that agree with us that do that. Ro Khanna in California is one that has supported that, especially in terms of the offshore drilling that's going on, the new leases that are being released. And other senators, other congressmen have indicated, that they do support what we're doing. But once again, the problem is you need 50 votes. And you don't have quite enough of them if you're looking at the two senators that are opposed to it on that side. And you also look at a sizable faction of the Republicans that don't support that, because a lot of them want to continue the use of fossil fuels, because a lot of the money they get comes from these fossil fuel and related energy companies. So, they don't want to necessarily bite the hand that feeds them, but what they also have to consider is how they're hurting their constituents, whether they know it or not. So we need them to assert some leadership. We need those that are in favor of it but are somewhat silent to join the fight and stand up for the people and their constituents and others, because this is really an emergency. If we don't do something and do it fast, we're going to be in trouble. Let me say this. Years ago we hear about this, that climate change was going to be a problem. Or what happened? Nothing going to really start showing its ugly little head till after 2050. Well, we're seeing it dramatically. I mean, case in point, Greenland, for the first time in recorded history, had rainfall. Most of the time that rain's in the form of snow, but now Greenland's seeing rain, and a lot of its ice sheet is melting. And so that should send us an alarm and also be a cautionary note to us that if we don't stop what we're doing, we're going to reach the point of no return. And that's not going to be good for any of us.
Right. We're talking with John Beer Jr., the founder and chairman, CEO of the Port Arthur Community Action Network. PortArthurCAN.org is the website. John, the conversation that we had just a minute ago about any allies that you may have in Congress was, took place within the context entirely of the Democratic Party. Are there any Republicans at all? I realize, the Koch brothers and some of the other right-wing fossil fuel billionaires have built out this huge and influential and powerful right-wing network all across the United States, and they obviously have an interest in fossil fuels. And they are the principal people who are holding up the Republican Party in so many ways. Are there any Republican allies for this, or is the entire Republican Party, gone down this totally nihilistic road of, we'll just, keep making money until everybody's dead?
From my perspective, I've seen very few of them that are willing to embrace it to the extent that we are. And when they do, if they only go halfway or part of the way. It's kind of like being half horse and half cow. You don't get any of what you need. They basically seem to be wanting a continuance of what's already in place. There are those that deny. There are those that say, well, yeah, but you're going a little too far too fast. But this is an emergency. We've got to do something, and we've got to transition to it. I mean, it's not like you're going to flick a light switch and change it, but you got to make the move. And most of them don't seem to want to make the move. The party's still caught up in Trump and Trumpism and denialism and anti-science. And that simply just isn't good, not to reasonable thinking people.
Yeah,
But
I'm with you.
so far as I know, most of them have not signed on or come on board or even suggested how they can make this more palpable or better.
There you go.
We're at a point where it's got to happen.
John Beard Jr., he is the, and thank you very much for being with us, John. He's the founder, chairman, and CEO of the Port Arthur Community Action Network, portarthurcan.org. Thank you, John.